it was so profound for me, and it was so liberating. This was something that helped me to not just be myself, but to express the best of who I am.
Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of 80% Mental. I'm Dr. Pete Olusoga, and I'm here with Dr. Leah Washington. This series, we're exploring the psychology of all things related to exercise and health and well-being. So we've got a really interesting episode lined up today. I'll talk to Leah a little bit first, and then we'll get into the episode. Leah, how's things?
Things are thinging. They're thinging.
Things are thinging. It's an interesting time in America right now.
Is that the word we're going to use?
I mean, we could use other words. I'm sure we will use other words. But there's a lot going on though, right?
Yeah, there's a lot going on that I am trying to balance between like full-blown ostrich mode and like trying to be vaguely aware of what's happening.
Yeah. This not so slow descent into literal fascism.
No, fairly rapid descent, I would say.
It's funny though, because I think like as psychologists, as psychology professionals, you know, working with clients and with athletes and coaches and you know, the general public, like we've got a bit of a responsibility to take into account all of this stuff, right? To address the bigger picture, because we don't operate in closed systems. We operate in the world that everybody lives in. So we kind of have to acknowledge that. And, you know, we have been talking about the role of psychology and health and well-being in this series. So we kind of thought it would be a good idea to do an episode on how psychology might help us to deal with all of the fucking shit that's going on right now. And I mean, you know, Trump's re-election, Elon Musk's slow government takeover. It's just, you know, there's so much going on right now. And we wanted to address some of that stuff. We wanted to talk about it because I think we've got a moral obligation to do so. And we have got an absolutely brilliant guest on today to help us, I guess, kind of just pick apart some of all of this stuff and think about how psychology can maybe help. So it's my absolute pleasure to introduce to the podcast our guest, David Smith. David, welcome to 80% Mental.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. And despite all the craziness and drama happening in the U.S. right now, I'm excited that we were able to have this discussion and expand upon all the how to navigate all this craziness.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really glad that you could take time to join us. Just by way of introduction, if you don't know, David Smith is a PhD candidate in sport, exercise science and psychology, with an MSc in sport and exercise psych and a BSc also. He describes himself as a whole mix of things, as a practitioner, including a professor, teacher, mental performance coach, strength and conditioning coach as well, a research scientist, podcaster, shout out to fellow podcaster, a sports diversity leader, and just so much more. So David, really, again, welcome to 80% Mental. Really, I'm glad that you've been able to find some time to join us.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's, you know, for me, it's hard to really put a single hat on me because I do a lot and I'm very passionate about this work. I'm very motivated to put my fingers in a lot of different things and stuff. So like you said, there's a lot going on there. I will say, like, I'm best described as a sport and exercise practitioner, which is both a very general description, but also a very comprehensive of all the things description as well. So
why don't you start by just telling us a little bit about you then, about, you know, what is your current role?
So currently I'm in upstate New York. I'm teaching sport and exercise psychology and also women in sports at a university here in upstate New York. This was a recent role that I took on while I'm here finishing my PhD. I just moved from Germany, where I spent 6 years doing grad school. So I spent 6 years doing grad school for my master's degree and my PhD in sport and exercise psychology and sport and exercise science at the German Sports University in Cologne. So I've been working on that, which has been very, very good for me as well. But then I was offered this job to do some teaching, so I was able to make the move back. You know, maybe a little premature given the election outcome, but I was very excited to have the opportunity available to me. And so I did take the chance. Now I'm here in upstate New York, and now I'm knee deep in the middle of the semester, you know, working with my students and everything like that, while also reestablishing my professional self here in the U.S. to be able to expand my roles upon coaching, and also research science.
Yeah, fantastic. Leah, have you ever been to Germany?
I've actually never been to Germany.
I don't think I've been through Germany. I don't think I've ever actually been to Germany. How long did you say that you were there for?
Not that I'm biased, but you should definitely go to Germany because it's pretty fabulous. And so I was based in Cologne, which is on the west side of Germany. It's also one of the gayer cities of Europe. It's basically the San Francisco of Europe, and it's a very fabulous town. It's also known for its inner beauty more than its external beauty. So,
okay.
you know, but I really loved the time in Cologne. It was a very important aspect of my life because I spent the last 30 years living in Denver. I grew up, born and raised in Denver, Colorado. And when it came time to I wanted to go to grad school, but also just seek a little bit more challenge to my own personal and professional life, that I knew I needed to leave Denver. And I'd always wanted to live abroad. So I thought, okay, grad school is a great reason to go abroad for things like, visas and resident permits issues and also things. But also doing school in Germany is significantly cheaper than doing college in the U.S. So that was also definitely a benefit there. And then just being able to have the opportunity to go and live in a different country, to be a foreigner, because a lot of this discussion is always centered around immigrants and people that can't speak the language, and do they actually have a place in the country, things like that. So for me as an American, to be on that side of the discussion of a person that doesn't speak the language, of a person that doesn't have the working knowledge of the culture, to be on that side of the discussion and get that kind of experience was very, very important for me.
Presumably, you were there for 6 years. You picked up some German, right?
Yes, definitely. My grad school wasn't English, but I to navigate daily life, you got to know some German, and I practiced some German going into it. But when you actually get there and you're forced to speak it not fluently, you're forced to speak it. It really helps in the learning process.
I can say like 3 things in German. I studied German for 2 years in high school and was just awful at it. But I can say, haben Sie ein Blatt Schreibpapier bitte? Have you got a piece of blank paper, please?
Very useful when you're in school.
Wie komme ich am besten zum Bahnhof bitte? Where's the train station?
And wo ist die Toilette bitte? Where's the toilet?
Nehmen Sie die erste Straße rechts und die Post ist auf der linken Seite.
So giving some directions, being able to tell people where to go.
Yeah, so that's the extent of 2 years of.
Nice. For me, my most iconic moment in my German language abilities is when I was able to go to the bakery, and so when you order food or you go to like a restaurant or something like that, the exchanges are very fast and very intense, and it's like you have to know when you get to the counter, you have to know what you want. They do not tolerate people that just will be like, so if you don't know what you want, you need to stand to the side and let other people go, right? Yeah. And so I'm standing in line and I know what I want, but the baker does not speak English. So I have to translate it and tell them in German. And the first few times I was like, my anxiety was super high, and it was a performance, right? But it's like the performance where you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm doing. And so every time I would go back, I would be constantly like mentally rehearsing things like, okay, here's what I'm going to say. Here's how I'm going to say it. Watching the interactions of the other people in front of me to see what they're doing, things like that. And then the first day when I was able to go and navigate the whole process in German, she's like, hallo, bitte schön. Oh, ich möchte ein Brötchen mit Schinkenkäse und Ei. Oh, mit Salat und Tomaten? Nein, ohne Salat. And I was like able to go back and forth with the follow-up questions and just bounce back, and then everything was good. And it was the right thing that I wanted. And I was like, I literally left the bakery. I was like, yes!
Bonus.
It's like, I got my sandwich. Everybody's like, okay.
I want to talk a little bit about your approach to practice. Really, you talk a little bit about this on your website, and it's about using sport and exercise to pursue positive change in people, in like ourselves, in each other, like, and in society. And I guess I was just curious as to where that approach has come from, what's driven that approach. If you could tell us just like a little bit about that.
Right. I mean, so first you kind of look at the theoretical side of things, right? So motivational science, one of the most key elements of motivational science, talks about how you're intrinsically motivated through things like social support and autonomy. And I always express this really firmly in my sports psychology classes, is when we talk about concepts like psychological safety, it's always good advice to be yourself, things like that, right? That is very key in not just being able to express the best of who you are, but to generate intrinsic motivation. And for me, my most profound experience was when all the way back to 2008, I started swimming again after high school. I had quit the swim team because I was gay and I was discriminated against. And I spent high school doing other things, but then I was at a point post high school where I was very depressed. I was struggling with mental health issues. I was very lonely. I didn't have any friends, things like that. And I was like, I need to make a change. I want to do something different. Well, turns out swimming was the liberation for me, and ironically was the thing that, pushed me away. Now it was the thing that was going to bring me back and help liberate me from myself. And so I joined a swim team, but I didn't join just any swim team. I researched an LGBTQ specific swim team. And so being able to join the swim team, be a part of this system, this community that was formed, right? It wasn't just the broader LGBT community. It was the swimming community, right? And, it was just a fun social group. We would push ourselves in the pool. We were, going and having dinners, and we were fundraising, things like that. And so we would train for competitions. We would generate collective goals as a group. I also had individual goals for myself, things like that. And one of the goals ended up being to attend the Gay Games, which was in 2010. The Gay Games is a large LGBT multi-sport event about the size of the Olympic Games in terms of athlete participation. So this thing draws out like 10,000 to 12,000 athletes every 4 years. It's the whole drama. It's the whole pageantry of it all. You got opening ceremonies, closing ceremonies. You got, the sports events. The whole city comes out, cultural events, festival village, all this stuff. It's an amazing event. And that was the first time. And so leading up to that, we were fundraising, we were training, we were really like doing a lot of things that I felt like I was part of something greater than myself. And I was pushing myself in the pool to be the best that I could be. I knew that when I was going to the Gay Games, I wanted to be at my peak. And so I was training hard and just having a blast doing it, right? Then when I got there, holy crap, it was like, oh my gosh, this is a thing. This is what, like, this exists. This is amazing. This is a super cool. I mean, they had the biggest stadium and this was actually ironically also in Cologne, Germany. So it was my first time traveling to Germany at this point. They had their stadium, their main football stadium, the soccer stadium there that hosted the opening ceremonies. And so it was full of people, and they had a big show, and we got to do the Parade of Nations where we had, thousands and thousands of people cheering us on and things like that. And then I was able to participate in the swimming competition myself, and I did my best, and I won medals, and I posted personal bests, and I was having such a blast, and it was such an amazing, profound experience for me that I realized all of this through sport and exercise in the less than 2 years completely turned me around physically, mentally, and socially, and helped me to realize I am part of something greater than myself here. I am part of a community, not just the local swimming community, but the greater Gay Games community. I got to meet people all over the world, and it was so profound for me, and it was so liberating for me. And I realized this was something that helped me to not just be myself, but to express the best of who I am, and really challenge me on so many different levels. And then I realized the event itself, and I did my research on what is the history of the Gay Games, what is the things like this, and how much power that this event has had just in helping to shape our world's perception of LGBT people, how to fight for social justice, how to stand up against prejudice and discrimination. All throughout the history of Gay Games, there's so many examples of this happening where they've had the opportunity to make positive change, and they've done all throughout just by playing sports. For example, one of the hottest topics right now in politics is trans athletes, right? Trans people in sports, blah, 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 whatever, stuff. Gay Games has been answering this question for 40 years. This isn't a new question. It's been we've been there, done that, and it's something where it's been very progressive in so many ways, but it's also what I call one of the best kept secrets of the entire LGBT community, because for as big as this thing is, it's such a shock that people don't know about it. But it had a profound influence on me, and it shifted the trajectory of my entire life. My entire professional career comes down to that 2 weeks that I was in Germany in 2010 when I realized if I could benefit from this, I know other people should and could benefit from this. So it became my life's mission and goal to help other people see and discover that for themselves.
Yeah, I don't think we talk about that enough, really, that sort of real transformative power of participating in sport and that kind of community that you get from it. And, I know that sport has had a profound impact on my life. And I guess if you ask like a lot of people, they'd say probably the same.
Mm-hmm. I mean, everybody I'm sure has same stories in their own unique relative way. And that's really what the powerful of sport is. There's so many examples out there in the world of so many different ways that sport has been used to create positive change. And that's where I say, as much as it is just playing a game, it isn't. It's much more than that.
But I also think it is just playing a game, but so are a lot of things, like going to your D&D group is just playing a game, but it provides a huge community for it. So it's I think it's weird because I think sports simultaneously is both like you said, very liberating and very inclusive, but also feels very far away at the same time for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like, how do we use that idea of community and the idea of sport as an entry point for that community and making it accessible for people who have previously, especially for people who in marginalized groups, who think oh, that's not for me. That's not my space, right? And I think part of our responsibilities as practitioners is making that gap smaller and smaller. So since we are kind of talking about these systems of sport and thinking about having this more of an ecological approach, right? And these big, sort of zoomed out concepts and recognizing that there's a lot of intersections with a lot of different fields. Tell us from your perspective, how do you think about that in practice of all of these different intersecting fields and what it means for you in terms of how you work in this space?
It's like what I tell myself and I tell my students and I tell my athletes, it's all relative. It's all relative. So we obviously have, academic concepts. We have kind of established training approaches. We have all these different things that we learn. Okay, here's what you do to help your athletes, blah, 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 right? Which is great. It's a great foundational skill set to have, but it's all relative. As we also say in psychology, when they ask us questions, it depends, right? There's never a yes and no. It's always, it depends, right? So it's all relative because it's relative to the situation itself, the environment, the task, and the people within the group, right? So I like the ecological approach because it considers the dynamical systems theory. And the easiest way to kind of describe that is a lot of people, and I really get annoyed by this, you see a lot of people, especially psychologists, have a very mechanistic view of the brain. What that assumes is your brain is like a computer. If something breaks down in a computer, you can open it up, take it out, put a new one in, and it works, right? It works.
Blow on it a little bit, shake it.
Right. You can't do that with the brain. If you take out a chunk of the brain and replace it with somebody else's brain, that's not how it works, right? It's even if you just take out a chunk of the brain, we've seen, vast personality changes, right? So rather than looking at it like a machine, I look at it like a flock of birds. So if you ever watch a flock of birds flying around in the sky, they fly around in these really cool formations. They make all these amazing shapes. It's like literally a meditative, mindful type, you could just get transfixed by watching a flock of birds, right? But you ask yourself, what is governing the behavior of this flock? Is there a central leader? Is there a hierarchical structure? What is going on here? Why are these birds flying in this particular formation, right? And it turns out it's governed by a very basic set of rules. There's no hierarchy. There's no leader. All the birds exist within the flock on the same level. What they do, though, is that the birds themselves are focused on the bird in front of them and the birds to their left and right, okay? The birds to the left and right, they say, we need to maintain a specific distance left and right. So if the bird gets too far on one side, we get closer to them. They get too far on the other side, we get closer to them. If they get too close, we get further away from them, kind of just trying to establish a middle ground, right? And then you follow the bird in front of you. You say, okay, maintain a certain distance between the bird in front of you. If they turn, you turn relative to their angle as well, vice versa, right? So the individual movements of these birds, even the most minute movements, even if it's just like a little, like a millimeter shift, influences the behavior of the entire flock. And it could be, oh, the bird in front of you takes a sharp angle, but maybe you don't take quite as a sharp angle, which then determines the angles that everybody else takes. And the whole, so you see the formations of these birds happening seemingly at random, but it's governed by every single bird in there who contributes to that formation. And so that's how I also look at it and I approach training, sport, working with groups, all these things like that, right? Because it's also relative to the environment. If it's windy, that's going to affect how the flock flies. If they've been flying around for an hour, they're probably going to get pretty hungry and they're going to go find some food. You know, if it's cold, they're going to migrate to the south. If it's warm, they're going to migrate to the north, right? So all these things help influence this flock itself and the status of it, right? And so when we work with athletes, we work with teams, we need to know as practitioners, we can't just go in there and say, for example, all right, team, we're going to do a paced breathing exercise today, or we're going to do some random strength and conditioning program that the textbook says is ideal for soccer players or something like that. You cannot do that. Unfortunately, a lot of coaches do that. That's the problem, you know? So what you need to do is you need to go there and understand, okay, who are the people on this team? Get to know them as people. Get to know them as not just athletes. You're developing that rapport, right? You're developing the relationships that are so important in the work that we do. You're establishing those relationships. You're getting to know the people that you're working with. And then you're understanding, okay, what are your needs? What is specific to you? You know, what is going on, not just with yourself, but with your group, right? Did your team just come off of a bad game where you lost, where you thought you were going to win? Is everybody, you know, what's the kind of motivational climate of the group? What's the mental state of the group right now, right? So understanding what that is, understanding the individuals, right? Individual athlete A will respond to a more aggressive coaching style, but athlete B, you need to be a little more gentle, a little bit more, you know, one way or the other, right? So everybody responds. So being able to understand, how do I navigate coaching specific athletes? Because I know if one athlete's going to respond well to this, but the other athlete is not, I need to adapt myself accordingly. And that's the key, is it's all about adaptation. You take what you know, you take your knowledge, you take your experiences, you take all these things and you adapt it to fit the unique needs of the group and the environment in which they exist.
Well, I think we see this a lot, right, in sport, where whenever we talk about things like trades and trade deadlines, right, we always read these articles where they're just as if players were puzzle pieces, right? And I just like pluck this player and I stick him in here and he should be fine or she should be great and they should be whatever. And how many times have we seen where like an incredible athlete goes to a new team and they immediately tank? Or another athlete who's been really, really struggling, they go to a new team and all of a sudden they're like, where has this athlete been all our lives, right? And it's because they're in a different context, they're in a different system, they're in a different organization where they are allowed to, or they fit in, or they have like a particular relationship that they didn't have in this previous place, that we forget that like, well, if I need a power forward, I'm going to go out and get the best power forward. And it's like, well, is it the best power forward or is it the best power forward for your organization? Exactly. Right. And maybe an athlete is struggling, you know, just because of like where they are in that system isn't a good fit for them. And it's not because they're a bad athlete. And it's not even necessarily because it's a bad organization, right? It's just a mismatch at some, you know, sometimes.
Yeah. I think if we, you know, thinking about what we want to talk about today as well, you know, we've got all of those kind of organizational influences, cultural influences, like individual influences, who's the coach, who are the players. But again, you know, if we can broaden that right out, like there are other things that have an influence here on the way that athletes, coaches, people might operate within a particular system, i.e. the fact that, you know, the America is about to become a fascist state. That might have an impact on some people and how they perform, right? So there's all of these kind of broader influences. One thing before we go to a quick break, have you heard, because you were talking about birds earlier, have you heard the conspiracy theory that birds aren't real?
Yeah.
Have you listened to the interview with the guy? I can send you a link that's like.
I haven't.
It's great.
You should send me that link because
Yeah, John Amici told me about this a couple of weeks back, and it's the greatest thing I've ever heard.
Well, I got
Well,
Birds
the
aren't real.
best
They're
about it,
government drones, apparently, right?
apparently.
And when they sit on power lines, because they stand on power lines, right? Don't they? Apparently, that's good. That's because
Get it
they're
recharged.
recharged.
So government drones have been around for like hundreds of years. Yeah.
Well, and so why we had the pandemic because we had to upgrade all of the birds,
Right.
right? So you can't go outside.
Exactly. You know.
I love it.
So
I love it. I love
But the
it.
best part about it is that he started it at an abortion rights rally because so there was like an anti-abortion like protest or whatever, and he was like, "This is stupid," and so he was like, "What could I make a sign that was like that had nothing to do with anything that could like draw attention away from these bullshit anti-abortion assholes?" And so he made this sign about how birds aren't real, and that's how it started.
all right.
Amazing.
It's like whenever I meet like a moon.
I love this guy from top to bottom.
It's like whenever I meet a moon landing conspiracy theorist, and they're like, "Oh, you believe the moon landing happened?" I'm like, "Oh, you believe the moon exists?"
Yeah.
They don't know what to say. They're just like,
man.
"Okay, I'm out."
All right, let's take a break. This is the 80% Mental podcast. I'm here with Dr. Leah Washington and David Smith. And we've just been kind of hearing a little bit about David and his background, about approaches to working as a practitioner. And this idea that we don't operate in closed systems, right? This dynamical systems approach where there's so many different influences that might have an impact on how we perform and how we act and how we behave. And we mentioned at the start that there's a lot going on right now. The descent into fascism is one thing. We've talked about this already, but there's also a climate crisis, right? There's also instability across Europe and the threat of war, right? There's a cost of living crisis in the UK, and
Sounds so depressing.
It is, right? But this is the point. It's easy to let that stuff kind of take hold, right? And we want to talk about this because we should have some insight as psychology professionals, right? We should have some insight into like, how can we navigate all of this shit when everything feels awful, right? Everything feels like it's a little bit too much. Like the question I want to sort of lead this section off with, David, is like, what can we take from our work as psychologists that might help people who are genuinely at the moment feeling a little bit lost, a little bit angry, scared even, like where can we start?
One of the biggest things that we always talk about in sports psychology, especially when it comes to athletic performance and things, is resilience and grit. We love to like market it, right? We're like the poster child for resilience and grits. Well, guess what? Welcome to resilience, right? Because you've got so much happening right now, like you said, cost of living, instability, threat of war, economic depression is probably happening, fascism is happening, all these things are happening, right? And this is where it really comes down to not just how much we teach resilience, but how much we maintain resilience for ourselves. And there's a favorite quote, because one of the most important things for me, the work that I do in sports diversity, sports psychology, athletic performance, I also do very deep dives into diversity, especially LGBT diversity, right? So I had this whole thing about gay games. So one of the things that happening, especially when Trump was elected in its first term, and now especially now, is I've been really doing a deep dive in LGBT history, because the things that we're experiencing right now are not the first time these things have happened. This is not the first time our society has gone through this craziness, right? We've been in relative peace for the last several decades. I mean, relatively, because, it's all relative. And we've also, made some significant progress forward on human rights, inequality, things like that, right? But at some point, there is going to be pushback. There's going to be, as much as we swing one way, it's going to swing back the other way. And this is where we're swinging back, right? And we've seen this again throughout history. In the 1920s was a hugely progressive time for the LGBT community. They established in Germany, in Berlin, the very first research institute specifically dedicated to performing science for people based on sexual orientation and gender identity. So they had, for over 10 years, established so much research about what it means to be trans, what it means to be gay. What does that even exist, right? Well, guess what? The very first book burning that the Nazis did was the Hirschfeld Library, that institute. That's the first place they went, pulled out everything and burned it, right? Even more so, you had gay people and trans people being sent to the concentration camps during the Holocaust. After the Holocaust was over, after World War II was over, the Allies rescinded all the Nazi-era laws back to their pre-Nazi status, except for paragraph 175, which was the law that outlawed homosexuality. They maintained the Nazi-era version of that, which was very brutal, and they forced those concentration camp inmates to continue to serve out their sentence. And that law wasn't even rescinded until 1994.
Wow, I did not know that.
And that's just like the start of it, right? Because then you look at, all the other decades throughout, right? Why does the LGBT community have their history rooted in a riot, in the Stonewall riots, right? Because we got pushed so much to the very edges, the fringes, that, for being a community that has been labeled as sissies and fairies and, kind of the bottom rung of society. Well, we got pushed a little bit too far, and they discovered, okay, these sissies can fight back. And it's just amazing, right? And then you look back in the 1980s during the HIV/AIDS crisis, and that was a key aspect as well, because again, like I said, with gay games, when it comes to things like trans athletes and stuff, we've been here before. We've done this, And so, for example, in the HIV/AIDS crisis, there was this, mysterious disease, what they called a gay cancer, ravaging the U.S., ravaging Europe, killing an entire generation of gay men. And, everybody's looking, hey, government, can you do something about this? Can you, help us with some research? Can you do anything? They were quiet. This was Ronald Reagan was the president. He didn't give a shit. The conservative population did not give a shit. They all stayed silent. They were perfectly happy watching all these gay men die from this gay cancer because they felt it was a punishment from God or something like that, right? And so it took a long time before they started to acknowledge that it even existed, which was a very big struggle. So there's a very famous quote that I wanted to share from Dan Savage that talks about that. So this quote from Dan Savage says that during the darkest days of the AIDS crisis, we buried our friends in the morning, we protested in the afternoon, and we danced all night. And that was the key. Because, people are dying. We have to, unfortunately, face that reality, right? Well, that doesn't mean that we can't still advocate for change, but most importantly is by dancing all night was to separate ourselves from the stresses of the reality of burying our dead, from the tensions of protesting. Let's go out there and be ourselves and have fun and still have the permission to have fun. Because, things are dark, things are bleak, things are very serious, but we don't have to stop having fun. Because for most importantly, it was a self-care. It was how we helped to reset ourselves, to keep ourselves grounded, and to help ourselves maintain focus and resilience against the darkest parts of this era by going out there and saying, we are going to free ourselves from what everybody says that we're bad for, and we're going to go out there and have fun and enjoy ourselves and be ourselves, be the best of who we are. So for me, that really takes it into the meat of it all, especially when we think about that now, because it's the mental focus of it, right? It's, okay, there's a lot of things happening we cannot control, but we can control how we respond to it. And we are going to go protesting. We are going to go fighting the good fight. We're going to do what we need to do to fight against the fascism, fight against the attacks on us and stuff. But at the same time, we need to take care of ourselves. We need to go out there and remind ourselves we can still have fun. We can still enjoy ourselves. We can still be a community. We can still do the things that we need to do to allow ourselves to feel okay, so that when we do go fight, we can go fight without suffering from burnout. We can go fight with all the strength and power and confidence that we have as individuals and as a community to help keep moving forward and overcome the overall sense of, overwhelming pressure and dread that they're trying to put on us, right? Because they're trying to tire us out. That's what they're trying to do. That's why every time you wake up on the news, there's something new. There's always something different. They're trying to tire us out. They're trying to inspire bleakness. They're trying to discourage us by saying, here's so much that's happening, so many bad things that's happening. Don't even try. Well, that's what's going to come down to is our resilience of we need to keep moving forward despite all this.
Yeah. There's a couple of things that you said in there that I want to sort of pull apart and unpack a little bit. It's kind of really interesting. Like, I love this idea that just arming ourselves with knowledge of history is like such a powerful thing. Mm-hmm. Like, it's such a powerful thing to kind of understand the history of these things and where they've come from, and again, the history of perhaps protest against some of this stuff as well. I love the idea about giving yourself permission to actually enjoy life and to do things that are perhaps important for self-care. And I thought about this a lot over the last year, with the kind of ongoing genocide in Palestine, and just seeing the sort of news daily of just awfulness and horror, like constantly. And like, how do you have fun? Like when you're seeing that on the news all the time, like, how do you enjoy yourself? And it's about giving yourself permission in your little world to take care of yourself a little bit. And you can do those two things at the same time, right? Something horrible is happening. I'm also enjoying myself. Like, those two things can coexist, right? And then the third thing was just this notion of self-care. And again, like, really doing the small things that make our little world a little bit better. And, Leah, as you were kind of listening to David there as well, I just wondered what sort of jumped out for you. Like, how do you unpack all of this?
I mean, for me, I was thinking two things. Like, one, I mean, that Dan Savage quote is one of my all-time favorites, because it also is like, yes, you have to find enjoyment in life, because what are we going to fight for otherwise? I think it's a quote that's often misattributed to like Winston Churchill or something, where it's like, why would we have all these wars if we weren't going to fight for like art and humanity and all of these things that make life worth living, right? But wrapped up in that is, when we talk about like motivational theories, right, or like the self-determination theory, what is one of the big factors is relatedness, and the idea of social support and having that community is so incredibly important. Where do you build some of that resilience is through those connections and those relationships, right? And over and over and over again, we see in research of how social support can buffer so many of these other anxieties and isolations and depressions, and get us through that day-to-day, like we said, bleakness. When people feel like things are so overwhelming because it's happening on such a global scale, one of the things that I think is the most important is to think, well, what can I do locally? What can I do with myself? And I can build those relationships. I can build those communities. And by starting small, right, we can snowball it. And I think also we have a lot of opportunities to create communities in lots of different ways that we weren't able to do that before, like even online, or, watch groups, or, however you want to make that. Like, I think that one of the things that sport really does have is that ability to bring us together, even if you are not the one participating in it. And I think that that's why people think, like it's just a game or sports are frivolous. And it's like, no, they actually do a whole lot for society.
David, I feel like we can't not talk about the current climate in the USA and this pushback that we're seeing against DEI, right? Diversity, equity, inclusion, and a whole other bunch of acronyms that people use. So we'll stick with that one. But there's a pushback against that. And I wonder, I've heard from a lot of colleagues in psychology who are in teaching in particular, who are kind of feeling that their universities and their institutions kind of acquiescing to this pushback. And I wonder, what does this mean for us, again, as psychology professionals? What does this mean for our profession? I guess, what can we do about it? It's kind of a really big question, but, I just wonder your thoughts about this, like, because obviously you're experiencing this as well. Right. Tell me a bit about your experience of this.
Well, one of my favorite things that's been happening so far is that there's a whole lot more people out in the world right now that are learning exactly what DEI is, because they realize
Yeah,
they're
for
part of
sure.
DEI. You know?
Yeah.
When they realize, oh, I'm a veteran and now I no longer have health benefits, or I'm a woman and I just got fired from my job, or I, am, whatever, right? That's DEI. It's not just, a racial thing. It's not just a sexual orientation thing or a gender identity thing. It's literally all the things, right? Anything that,
Yeah.
diversity talks about, any kind of group that could be considered separated from the main hegemonic group, right? In some way that needs, like we talked about accessibility, needs some kind of special considerations for accessibility when it comes to things like equity, right? And inclusion and all these other things, right? So sometimes people are learning this the hard way. One of my favorite aspects that I learned about is really taking a foundation from Research Science 101, right? When we talk about data, we don't like homogeneous data, right? We like heterogeneous or heterogeneous data sets, right? And why is that? Because it's robust. We like robust data. We like data that represents the greater population of whatever our sample is taken from, right? Well,
Yeah.
that's diversity. Because when you think about it, okay, as much as we like to vilify DEI, we can't run away from it. It's going to exist. And, as much as they want to bury their heads in the sand and pretend like it doesn't, well, guess what? It's going to be here regardless, no matter what we do, because there's always a vast diversity of people, of genders, of sexual orientations, of race, ethnic backgrounds, religions, political views. One of my foundational rules in every single group I work with, whether it's my students, my teams, or anything like that, is that no matter what, you need to have respect. Okay. And respect is, I have no tolerance for disrespect. Anything that you do that makes a person feel bad or makes them feel less than whatever, that's disrespectful. And I don't care who you are or what your deal is. But if you come into my environment, I expect, my standard of expectation is always respect. So you can have opinions on one thing or another. I don't give a shit, right? The last thing people realize how quickly is how much I don't give a shit about their opinions, but at the same time, you do need to have respect for people to be their authentic selves, to be able to express themselves and create an environment of psychological safety, right? So, for example, I was working with a soccer team that was a very diverse soccer team. It was in Germany. It was a soccer team that had a lot of the refugees that had fled the violence in the Middle East that came to Germany. It was a lot of the kids from the parents that fled. Well, half of the refugees didn't even speak German. They didn't even speak English,
Yeah.
and they were predominantly Muslim. So you had a lot of Germans who were Christian and Jewish, and then you had a lot of the refugees that were Muslim, right? So you had a very diverse group of people within that. On top of that, here I come in as a very confident and very unapologetic gay person that's their coach, So definitely being able to make sure that we consider their cultural diversity and uniqueness, but at the same time also establishing a standard of respect to say, listen, if what you do harms another person, and that person is the determination of whether or not that harms them or not, if it harms them, that's unacceptable. Then here's the consequences of that action. You are not welcome in this group at all. So for me, it's always been about establishing that psychological safety and ensuring that A, we can express ourselves, but B, make sure we do it in a way that's respectful for everybody in the group.
Well, and I think that the ultimate irony is, right, like so I talk about, diversity in sport culture a lot with my undergraduate students, they're seniors. And I always say, like, even if like all you look at an athlete and you see them as an asset or you see them as a commodity, if you want to get the best performance out of them and all you care about performance, then you should care about diversity, because when a person is allowed to be who they are and they have that psychological safety and they have that acceptance, they will be a better performer. So even if you don't give a shit about them as a human being, which we would prefer that you did, but even if you did, right?
That'd be nice.
It would be nice, but like we can't always have what we want.
Right.
And like if you want to have the best performance, you want to have a winning team,
Yeah.
you should care about diversity. You should make this a place where people are accepted for who they are able to express themselves in a way that is safe and respectful to other people. Like that is the thing that is like, that's the thing that's going to get you to where you want to
Mhm.
be.
Yeah, it kind of leads nicely onto the next question, really, because this is something that I get asked quite a lot, and like I kind of waffle through it, but I never feel like I've got a great answer to this question, and it's about allyship, and there's I'll acknowledge that there's a bit of controversy over like whether allyship is a good thing or not. We can discuss that another time. But can you tell us from your perspective a little bit about allyship?
So first off, allyship is a good thing because it was because of allies that the gay community survived the HIV and AIDS crisis. Do you know why they call it LGBT?
Shout out to lesbians.
Shout out to lesbians. You know why? Because lesbians are the reason why the gay men had the social support that they needed. Because gay men were disowned by their families, had nobody to come and support them. So who stood up and took charge? The lesbians, right? And so allies on any level are super important. Now, here's the thing about allies, though, because a lot of diversity is performative. It's let's just make a statement about how diverse and inclusive we are. Oh, look at us. We're so diverse and inclusive. We have a rainbow flag. Look at us.
I think that's kind of what I meant by the controversy over allyship, because there is a lot of performative allyship.
Right, exactly. And that's where, you have to be careful, right? Because allyship, true allyship, is two things. You speak up for the people who are not in the room. So if you're in a place where there is no gay people to speak up for themselves, or trans people, or anybody else, whatever community you're speaking up for, you are speaking up for them and defending them in a room where they're not there. Okay. Second of all, you're doing that speaking up when it's not necessarily socially acceptable. So if you're in a group that's saying, we think that gay people are blah, blah, blah. We think that trans people are blah, blah, blah. And there's very bad things that they're saying. Not only are you speaking up, but you're saying, hey, what you're saying is wrong. So it's speaking up for the people not in the room, and also doing it when it's not socially acceptable. And that's really what allyship comes down to. Because for me, I could speak up for myself. When I would work with anywhere I go, anybody I work with, especially in sport, there's no shortage of homophobia and transphobia in sport. Whenever I see it myself, I speak up for it, right? Because I'm a gay person, and also I'm an ally for the trans community, so there's not necessarily going to be that representation of trans people there, but I am, as an ally, going to speak up and say, hey, that's not an acceptable thing just to say. That's disrespectful, try again, right? And so making sure that ultimately that's what it comes down to, just speaking up for people when they're not in the room, and making sure that you can do it also when it's not always socially acceptable, right? And this is where it comes down to things like education and knowledge, and just knowing what that history is and what the kind of current context of it all is.
I think also, the idea of like the added emotional labor and psychological labor that it takes as a marginalized person to take on all of those things. And that I think, as if you're a real ally, I think you have to recognize that you should be taking some of that burden off of those other individuals, right? That, I think for each one of us, like we each have our own marginalized identity. And so, for me as a white woman, like I need to be speaking up for, as a cisgendered white woman, speaking up for, my LGBTQ buddies and my people of color buddies and all of those people who are meaningful and part of my life. Whereas I would hope that other people in my life would also stand up for anti-Semitism when they see it, right? That we all have to take this collective, labor, that it's not just my responsibility as a Jewish person to educate everybody else about what it means to be Jewish, or what it means to experience anti-Semitism, or to stand up for anti-Semitism when I see it, that it is a collective effort.
And I think that the final thing that I'd probably add is that it's a collective effort to do all of those things, and the things that you were saying as well, David, but without the expectation of a nice pat on the back. for doing so.
Exactly.
Because then it does spill over into that sort of performative allyship that is so annoying.
Oh, good job. Thank you. Pat on the,
Are you centering yourself in that allyship, or are you centering the person that you're trying to be an ally for?
I'll tell you a story, which I'm not going to put in the episode. I'm going to edit it out. But I think I might have told you this before, Leah, but a couple of years ago during the Black Lives Matter movement, we got an email from our university. So this is the 80% Mental Podcast. I'm Dr. Peter Olusoga, here with Dr. Leah Washington and David Smith, who has joined us to talk about how we can use psychology to help us navigate all of this shit that's happening in the world right now. And we've talked about some really interesting things about learning the history of discrimination and bigotry, and how just understanding that history can be really useful for us moving forward. We've talked about the need to prioritize self-care, even in a world that feels like it's falling to pieces. David, before I get to the final few questions, I don't know if you've listened to recent episodes of the podcast. We've got a little game that we like to play just to get to know our guests a little bit more. Awesome. We've heard about you as the psychologist. We've heard about you ordering sandwiches in Germany. But we want to get to know you a little bit. So first of all, are you up for playing our little game?
Yes, that sounds fabulous.
Fantastic. Okay, so here's how it works. I've got 4 different categories of questions for you. I've got 4 virtual envelopes, and what I'm going to get you to do is to pick a number between 1 and 4, which will generate our random questions. So the categories, first of all, are this or that, favorites and firsts, hypotheticals, or perspectives. And you get to choose a number.
Let's go with number 4.
Number 4. Okay, I'll shuffle my little virtual envelopes. And we've got, what have we got? We've got perspectives.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask you some questions about your perspectives.
All right. I got lots of opinions, so this is always good.
We'll see how we get on. So first one, big one to start with. What do you want to be remembered for?
Ultimately, what it comes down to, I want to be remembered for having a positive impact on my community. In a lot of different ways. You think about, all the different works that I'm doing. I could sum up my career approach into 3 general senses, right? But it's not just about your professional career. It's about who you are as a person. I always think, what are people going to say about me at my funeral? Ultimately, what it is I want people there to be there because I had a positive impact on their life. And ultimately, that's what it comes down to, I think, no matter what else.
I like that. Leah, what about you? Have you thought about this? You thought about what you want to be remembered for?
I think I kind of had the same thought process of I often go back and forth of do people even remember who I am? I'm always surprised when people are like, oh, I know who you are. And I'm like, really? But I think I'd want to be remembered for my thoughtfulness towards other people and my kindness towards other people.
Yeah, no, I like that. And again, it's like the what will people say at your funeral? It's like a really kind of classic way of accessing people's values, isn't it? And I think that those are the things that are important. I want to be, apart from having an absolutely sick podcast, I want to be remembered for I want my daughter to remember me as a really good father. And that's kind of the most important thing for me.
Well, play your episodes of your podcast at your funeral.
The theme music.
I'll get up there. I'll be like, you guys.
As they bring the casket in, we'll have the 80% mental theme music.
We'll have one more podcast. We'll make the funeral podcast. The last episode of the podcast will be your eulogy.
Me and David.
I'll leave it in capable hands. Okay, David, what's something that you think about every day?
That is a very good question. I think pretty consistently, I think about how can I get better? How can I be better? I've been doing a lot of, especially lately, I've been doing a lot of work on trying to expand my knowledge base and challenge myself in a lot of different ways. And so a lot of it's kind of just rooted in, okay, what can I do today to A, be the best of who I am, and B, how can I be better? Whether it's challenging, trying something new, continuing studying, reading, learning new things, pushing the limits of what I can do and I don't know, all sorts of different ways. But in the end, it's how can I
Yeah.
be better?
Well, yeah, thoughts?
Yeah, I think about that a lot in terms of like it varies. I think sometimes it's like, what is something I think about every day is like, how do I get through this day?
Yeah.
I'll also say it's also like, what am I going to eat? I'm very hungry.
I was gonna. That was
Yeah,
mine.
like very concerned about
Yeah.
snacks.
What's for tea?
That's what I think about every day.
I mean, I was going to say that too, but I was like, maybe I should make it more profound, or
Nah, you can go lowbrow. It's fine. Something that you'd like to change about yourself.
I'm going through this process right now. I'm working on losing some weight and getting myself back
Okay.
into my more athletic conditioning, athletic shape that I was in. I put that aside when I went to Germany, and then I discovered German croissants and bakeries and good, delicious
Oh man.
things. And yeah, and then the
Yeah,
pandemic hit,
that's
and then
fair.
that made it even worse. And then I got knee deep into grad school and put on the grad school 50. So
Yeah.
that's been fun. So I'm wanting to lose the weight, but also I really enjoy not just teaching sport, not just coaching sport, but a huge, like, as I explained in the beginning, a huge aspect of my entire journey has been doing sport. So I want to get back into doing
Yeah.
sport.
Yeah, I think for me, self-criticism is probably the thing that I could probably do the most work on. Of like, no, you're not a piece of shit. Actually, you're just a person.
Just remember, it's a garbage can, not a garbage can't.
You just cannot.
Exactly. Well, even if you're trash, it's a garbage can.
Okay. Oh, this is a good one. What's one trait that you value the most in other people?
Like I said, it really comes down to respect. We can have different opinions, and I've had some very, very dramatic discussions with people on a lot of things, right? But in the end, the thing that always kind of determines, no matter how heated a discussion gets, are we still able to respect each other?
I think for me, it's about empathy, which is kind of related to that, or like perspective taking of like, I can put myself in your position, right? And I can see things from where you're coming from.
What's a lesson that you wished you'd learned sooner?
Oh gosh, so many lessons. A good lesson that I wish I would have learned sooner is how to be a little more open to allowing myself. And this is a very good question. You actually kind of stumped me. That's not very easy to do. I think a good lesson I wish I would have learned myself had been earlier on is how to give people the benefit of the doubt. I'm a very self-defensive person. And especially when I was younger, I always felt like people who were maybe trying to criticize me or, but do so in a way that, like, not being mean, but just trying to, like, help me out in a lot of ways, that maybe they had good intentions or that, they weren't entirely being assholes, something like that. So I was a very self-defensive person when I was younger, which was rooted in experience. So it's not like it just came out of nowhere. It's definitely rooted in a lot of experience, but also to, like, free myself from that negative perspective and just be willing to give people more of the benefit of the doubt. If all else, just to be like, so why did you say that? Feel free to explain. Just adding that little extra on there to see if they actually were, maybe good intentions or not. Because I unfortunately have killed a lot of friendships, and I've killed a lot of potentially strong relationships because of stupid shit like that.
It's funny because mine's the exact opposite. Is that I think I gave some people too much benefit.
Okay.
Where I was like, no. I bet what they really meant is like, no, actually, like, I need to have a boundary here. I've got rose-colored glasses on, so red flags just look like flags, right? Like, so like, maybe I should take a step back. Am I trying to excuse too much behavior in a way that is actually harming me? And I need to be like, actually, you know what? This is not okay.
Right. Boundaries are good. Always have
boundaries are good. And that was a really tough lesson to learn.
Top item on your travel bucket list. Somewhere you've always wanted to go that you've never been.
Okay, so, and I'm going to try and pull this off. I'm a huge fan of Jurassic Park. The movie, the books, the franchise, all of it. I am also a huge fan of roller coasters and amusement parks.
Okay.
Hence, maybe there's a relationship there between Jurassic Park and amusement parks. I wanted to do this 3 years ago when Jurassic World Dominion came out. Universal Studios in Orlando had just opened up a new expansion to their Jurassic Park area, including a new roller coaster called the Velocicoaster.
Incredible name.
I know,
Is
right?
it?
It is fantastic. And the ride itself is insane. It is unreal. And it has gotten such positive reviews, and it's considered one of the higher best roller coasters in the world right now.
Yeah. Okay.
And I really wanted to at the time to go, because Jurassic World Dominion was coming out in June of 2022. I really wanted to go. That was the year that Velocicoaster opened. So I wanted to go and have a trip to Universal Studios where I went and saw the premiere of Jurassic World Dominion, and then got to spend the day or two at Jurassic Park and riding Velocicoaster and all the cool stuff like
saying Velocicoaster.
Please continue to say Velocicoaster at
Velocicoaster.
every
It's such a great name. And yeah. So unfortunately, I did not make that trip because I was in Germany and I could not afford it. And, even just that Florida trip to any of those parks is super expensive. Well, I'm hoping I'm trying to save some money because now they have a new Jurassic World film coming out, Jurassic World Rebirth. Well, that's also my opportunity to go and have that exact trip, to go to Universal Studios and watch the movie and ride the Velocicoaster and do all the things and buy all the merch. Especially going to buy all the merch. Need some Jurassic Park merch, and all the things like that. So that's definitely the top of my travel bucket list right now. Okay. But the other top travel bucket list is when I fly back to Germany to finish my PhD, because I have to go back for my dissertation defense. So I'm just waiting for the final little couple things to come together so I could put a date on that, and so I could book my flight and go defend it. And then hopefully you'll have to come back and re-edit this episode to call me doctor.
Yeah, I'm not going to do that. I'll start calling you doctor now. I've done it before. I've just given out doctorates to people. Just
all right, you can give me a doctor.
He's calling me a completely separate name. So
pipe down, Lisa. Leah, I've asked you this question before, Leah. Somewhere you've always wanted to go but never been.
I've always wanted to see the Aurora Borealis. I think that would be really, really epic. And then the other thing on my list is the Olympics. Obviously. You know how I feel about the Olympics.
Yeah. You and me both, girl. You and me both.
Yeah. I've never been east. I've been west quite a lot from the UK. I've never been to the Far East, which I quite like to do. Some places I would like.
And also, I'm going to add Germany to the list, to my bucket.
Okay. Yeah.
It is east.
I mean, I've been a little bit east into Europe, but not sort of further than that. Okay, final question then. Who's someone that you would love to have a conversation with? Anybody in the world?
Oh, so many good, amazing people to have a conversation with. I think, when we talk about LGBT history, Magnus Hirschfeld, the scientist that started the Institute of Sexuology or something like that. I don't remember exactly what the name of it, but he was the guy that actually did the research in the 1920s. He would be interesting to have a conversation with.
Yeah.
I would also love to have, I don't really know. There's a lot of people.
Yeah.
At the same time. It depends on the perspective, I think.
Okay.
There's people I want to learn good from, but also people I'm like, WTF.
There's some people that I want to have a conversation with, and some people that I want to study under a microscope. Those are the same thing.
We're gonna point a camera at you and make this into a research paper, because we're gonna take some things from this.
Yeah, there's a few people that can fall into that. Right. David, thank you so much for playing our little game. I feel like I've got to know you a little bit better, which is kind of the point. So thanks so much.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
This is the 80% Mental Podcast. I'm here with Leah Washington and David Smith, and we are talking about how we can use psychology to navigate all of this stuff that's happening in the world. If you want to, what am I talking about? I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts. You can leave us a comment on the website at 80percentmental.com. You can find us on Twitter at EPM Podcast or on Instagram at 80% Mental. And you can listen to all of our other episodes as well and subscribe on the website. Again, 80percentmental.com, all words. David, before we finish up, I've just got a couple of questions. Probably just one question, really. We'll kind of see where it goes from that. We've talked about all of the stuff that's going on, right? But at the same time as this stuff, we've got a lot of, how do I put this, deliberate rollback of things that might actually be helpful, right? So, for example, at the same time that LA is literally on fire, America's withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement, right? Huge cuts to the Environmental Protection Agency. There's an outbreak of measles in Texas right now, right? An entirely preventable disease, but we have
one that
this
should
kind
be
of
completely cured.
Right, with this kind of rise in anti-science. We've got fucking RFK Jr. talking shit about biological sex that he knows nothing about.
Nothing about.
Right?
Oh my gosh!
Yeah,
I don't know shit.
He literally has a worm in his brain.
Yeah. But this is the point, right? This is the point. Okay, so we're seeing all of this stuff happening, and again, this rollback of things that are actually useful in terms of this massive anti-science movement, right? And the death of the expert. We talked about that with Nick Tiller on the episode about bad science, right? The death of the expert. Okay, we're in a position where, again, we're in the field of psychology. What kind of things can we do, as a sort of final question, to stand up to this anti-science movement that's sort of resurging across the globe?
Well, as we you already brushed upon a little earlier, the biggest thing that we can do is educate ourselves, to learn the history, to learn the science, to learn all these different things. I had a fantastic discussion the other day when I was going to the gym. I had a shirt on that you may have seen it when I posted some content when I was doing the mental performance coaching on a bus. I was wearing the shirt, "Trans Athletes Belong in Sports." And I was wearing that shirt when I went to the gym, and the front desk lady said, "I really like your shirt." We ended up having a conversation about trans athletes. She's a cisgender woman who, is very curious about the topic herself. And so we had a great discussion about it. Her thing was, and she was asking me, she said, "Well, I've had people at this rec center come in and ask me just arbitrarily, what do you think about all these trans people in sport, Well, she said, I've got opinions. I believe trans women are women. I believe trans men are men. I support, trans people doing sports, blah, blah. But she said, I really don't know how to have that discussion. I really don't know how to educate people if they ask this question. And so that's where it really came down to, because it's like, it's anti-science. And what are they doing? Is they're doing the book bans and they're doing the book burnings. I mean, when they burned the Hirschfeld Library, the Nazis burned that library, we lost all that research. We lost all that information that has taken us literally 50, 60, 70, 80 years to discover again, to do the research again, to understand it again. So the most important thing we can do is educate ourselves. There's no shortage of information out there right now, especially we have access to the largest collective database of knowledge in human history. So there's definitely, ways that we can access it, right? Because like you said, somebody like RFK Jr. has no idea anything about biological gender or sex.
He doesn't have much of an idea about anything. Let's face it.
So, exactly. And that's the people they're putting in office.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So how can we, say, well, here's what actually is the thing.
Yeah. I found an interesting study from the Ohio State University. Well,
Buckeyes. Is it because? Yeah.
And it was about why people are anti-science, why people hold these kind of anti-science beliefs. And a couple of things that there was loads in the study, but a couple of things that I'll highlight are when the sources of scientific information, i.e. scientists, are perceived as not being experts or untrustworthy or biased, then they lack credibility and their messages are somewhat ignored or rejected. And when the information contradicts what people believe to be true or what they think is favorable, right, then they experience this cognitive dissonance. And the way they resolve that is by rejecting the scientific information, because it's much easier to do that than to actually change what you believe, right? So the idea is that we need to be better at scientific communication. We need to be better at doing it. It's all very well and good kind of being in the classroom and teaching our students, but we need to be better at communicating this to the public. We need to do so in accessible language. We need to be personable when we're doing this. And I think as well, I was thinking about this the other day when, all through COVID and through, all the stuff that's happening now, like the experts that I see talking about this stuff on television, generally speaking, are still old white dudes.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then when you've got like populations who may have legitimate reasons for being a little bit anti-science and anti-medicine because they've been experimented on unethically, right, historically, and there's a historical distrust of the medical profession, right? The people who are communicating the science are still these old white dudes. So, we have to get better at communicating science, and we have to have a more diverse group of people who are doing the communicating as well.
Well, and I think also to both of your points is like, I think it really is important to be able to have like these rational discussions of like, here is what the science says, here is what we know about this, and here, and to talk about those things, but to recognize that, kind of to your point, Pete, is that it's not just because if we could just say like, well, if they just knew the science, if we could just have a rational conversation, like we still wouldn't be here. That we have to also recognize that a lot of these conversations are emotional conversations, and that a lot of these things are based on like what you're talking about, Pete, is like they're based on fear, they're based on mistrust, they're based on all of these underlying emotional reasons. And that is why I think sometimes why when we present this cognitive dissonance that they discard the science is because they're in that self-protective mode, right? They are trying to, that they don't like feeling wrong. They don't like that discomfort of like, well, that's just what I believe, right? And they kind of like revert back to that. And so I think we need to be, as scientists, to recognize that we are not always having a scientific conversation, that we're not always having this rational conversation, that to our larger point, we are talking to a human person who is bringing with them all of these, whether it's a woman who has never been believed about her pain and discomfort by physicians, right, and is seeking alternate therapies for that, or whether it is, other marginalized groups who, like you said, who have deep mistrust of physicians and the scientific community at large, that there is this, I think, belief by scientists that it's like, well, if they just understood the science, we would all agree. And it's like, no, because we are people and we work in these contexts and we have these, other parts and pieces that we're bringing to the table.
And like I said earlier, it's all relative. It's all relative, right? Because it's relative to the unique needs of the audience which you're trying to educate. It's how do you have the conversation on their level? What is their level of understanding? What is their level of investment in this topic, right? Is it emotional? Is it rooted in history? Whatever it could be, right? And it's how do we navigate those discussions that really come down to it? Because in the end, we want them to buy into our argument, right? But if we're not doing a good job of arguing our point in a way that they can understand and are open to that message, well, it doesn't matter.
One of the guidelines that I find really helpful is to argue like I'm right, but listen like I'm wrong. And I think if we, instead of like taking that defensive standpoint of like, well, I have the science behind me, this is what it is. But if I listen to like, what is the underlying thing that the other person is bringing to, why are they so defensive about this? I think we can have that's where our strength as people who come from a psychology background, that's where our strength is that we can have those conversations and recognize that we might be having two different conversations.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm looking at the clock. It's probably as good a place as any to bring things to a close. David, thank you so much for taking, again, a little bit of time out to come and chat to us on the 80% Mental podcast. It's been a really, really brilliant conversation. So thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. It was fun. I really enjoyed it. I love talking about this stuff. So Always good to keep the conversation going.
Cool. And we've been talking about, all of the horror in the world. So I wanted to end with some good news stories. So researchers at the European Laboratory for Particle Physics in Geneva are developing new radiotherapy machines that should be able to treat cancer, complex brain tumors, much more effectively with fewer side effects. Amazing. A woman in China was knocked off her bike and broke her collarbone. Not great. But the man driving the car apologized, visited her in hospital every single day, and now they're married.
Okay, congrats.
So that's nice. Yeah, it's not the ideal way to, get
I had
a
something
wife,
neat.
but
I ran her over with my car.
Yeah, and then I love this one. So in the Amazon rainforest, there's a few, not many, but a few kind of really busy highways that just kind of dissect it. And conservationist Fernanda Abra has worked alongside indigenous groups to create a series of treetop rope bridges for monkeys to safely cross the roads.
Oh, that's excellent.
Which is awesome. Now, imagine if that was the stuff that we were getting on the news every day.
Right. I would love it. I remember during the COVID pandemic, when everything felt like it was pretty dark, one of my favorite news stories came out of Germany was, naked man has to chase after a hog that stole his computer laptop or his computer bag. Great picture of him on the front page of a newspaper of him running naked after a hog that has his computer bag in it. I was like, that's the kind of news I like.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we're running out of time, so it just remains me to thank Leah, co-host. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, bestie.
And once again, to thank David Smith for talking to us today. Thanks, David.
And thank you for the invitation.
So this was the 80% Mental podcast, and I hope you enjoyed what you heard today. Feel free to leave us a comment, or you can listen and subscribe on the website, 80percentmental.com. You can find all of our other episodes. You can find us on Twitter at EPM Podcast, or you can find us on Instagram at 80percentmental. So thanks once again for listening, and we will see you next time.
Will we?
Auf Wiedersehen.
Well, we won't, because it's a podcast. So
you don't see anybody.
No.
You just listen.